In the summer of 1812, while the young American nation was consumed by war and expansion, a remote childcare home in southern Illinois became the stage for one of the most horrific and silent tragedies in U.S. history. Officially, the ledger listed only 4 deaths. But in truth, 45 children vanished over the course of a single summer. No fires. No epidemics. No war nearby. They were simply gone. The home, run by a woman known only as Miss Wren, had served as a modest refuge for war orphans and unwanted children. She was praised in town sermons, cited in government correspondence, and once even received a letter of gratitude from a general's wife. But by the end of that fateful summer, Miss Wren was no longer seen. The building was abandoned, sealed shut with iron nails, and erased from public memory. It wasn't until 1924, over a century later, that state records were reviewed during a land dispute. The new owner of the property, set to build a barn, discovered a stone hatch buried under decades of soil. Inside, shoes, dolls, a child's braid wrapped in muslin, and a torn page from a hymnal. Authorities recovered remains beneath the stone floor, small bones, some fractured, some intact. There was no official report. The hatch was resealed. This story was never printed in newspapers. Not a single sermon mentioned the home again. Survivors? None. Witnesses? Silenced. And Miss Wren's name was scrubbed from every census and legal document. What happened that summer remains one of the most calculated acts of collective forgetting in American history. But now we've unearthed the sealed testimonies, retrieved letters from an archived asylum journal, and spoken with a descendant who found a child's ring sewn into the lining of an heirloom quilt. Subscribe now and stay with us, because what happened to those 45 children wasn't an accident, and the truth may be even darker than the silence that buried it. Chapter 1: The Woman Behind the Iron Gate. The town of New Elbridge, nestled between the salt marshes and dense woods of southern Illinois, was not marked on most maps in 1812. It had no train line, no courthouse, no army post. It was a settlement of barely 60 families, German farmers, retired fur traders, and a handful of widowed women raising children on war pensions. Life was quiet, predictable, boring even, which made Miss Wren's home all the more special. She had arrived in 1809 with a black wagon, a caged canary, and a letter of recommendation signed by the town priest of Terre Haute. No one ever confirmed its legitimacy, but no one dared challenge her either. She rented the large colonial house at the end of Alder Lane, a house locals believed to be cursed after its original owners, a judge and his wife, died in their sleep under what the midwife called unnatural circumstances. But Miss Wren was undeterred. Within weeks she had the shutters repaired, the bell tower reinstalled, and a carved wooden sign hung over the gate, the Wren House for Children of Grace. At first there were 6 children. All orphans. All quiet. Miss Wren dressed them in gray uniforms and taught them scripture, penmanship, and silence. That's what she called it, the discipline of silence. Neighbors said they'd see the children in the garden, weeding barefoot with hands bound behind their backs. They never spoke even when greeted. And yet the town admired Miss Wren. She baked pies for the parish, donated milk to poorer families, and offered her chapel room for grieving mothers to sit in prayer. By 1811, the home housed 19 children. Some came from local counties, others were sent by parishes across the state. One little girl, Josephine, had been found sleeping in a hollow tree by soldiers returning from Vincennes. Another, a boy called Abel, had a burn scar across half his face and never blinked. But they were fed, clothed, and, at least to the outside world, safe. Then came the summer of 1812. The records were sparse, but the town doctor's journal, found years later in the attic of his granddaughter, contained a note dated June 2nd. Wren sent for me again. 3rd child in a week with unexplained fever and delirium. Refuses to allow others into the sickroom. Says the devil lives in bone. On June 10th, a boy named Marcus was buried in the chapel yard. The cause was listed as lung sickness. On June 17th, 2 girls, twins, were said to have run off into the forest and gotten lost. No search party was organized. On June 21st, another child reportedly died in his sleep. But when the gravedigger went to retrieve the body, He found the bed empty and the sheets burned in the fireplace. By July, whispers began. The town baker told his wife he had seen Miss Wren carrying something heavy in a linen sack to the old smokehouse behind the property. A farmhand claimed he'd heard humming, low guttural humming, coming from beneath the floorboards of the chapel at night. And a young woman named Eliza, whose brother had been taken in by Miss Wren the previous spring, tried to sneak onto the grounds one morning. She was never seen again. Still no one intervened. Miss Wren hosted Sunday prayer meetings as usual. She wore her white gloves. She handed out lemon biscuits and quoted proverbs. When someone asked about the missing children, she would smile and say, "God reclaims what he loves most." And that was that. The ledger from that summer shows food expenses decreasing steadily each week. By late August, the bill for milk had dropped by half. Firewood went untouched. The children's uniforms were no longer being mended. And the chapel bell, once rung every morning at sunrise, remained silent. A final note, scribbled in the margin of the town priest's notebook, read, "Visited Wren House. No children seen. Curtains drawn. Wren pale, incoherent. Said they had all gone home. Refused communion. Eyes bloodshot." Then nothing. The house closed its doors in September. A black cloth was nailed across the chapel door. Miss Wren stopped appearing at Massachusetts. Her letters went unanswered. By October, a new family moved into town, a couple from Kentucky. When the wife asked about the tall house at the end of Alder Lane, the butcher simply said, "It's not a place for questions." For decades, the Wren house stood empty. Locals claimed to hear children laughing on moonless nights. A traveling preacher once swore he saw small hands pressed against the attic window. In 1846, a group of boys dared each other to enter through the cellar. Only one came back. He never spoke again. The town tried to forget. Tried to bury the silence beneath crops and prayers. But the ground remembered. And the ledger, hidden in a locked drawer of the old parish desk, remembered too. 45 names. 45 entries marked with a red X. No explanations. No dates of death. Just one line, scrawled in Miss Wren's own hand beneath the final name. "They are ready now. The silence is complete." After the house closed, a strange fog began to gather over the grounds at dusk. Farmers on the adjacent land reported that animals refused to graze near the eastern fence, and dogs howled or whimpered when led toward the property. A midwife, passing by with her daughter, claimed she saw dozens of shoes lined up neatly on the chapel steps. Children's shoes, mismatched, facing the door. The town didn't speak of the Wren house anymore. It became a silent understanding that no one walked past Alder Lane after dark. When travelers asked about the imposing structure nestled among the oaks, they were met with vague phrases, "No one's lived there in years," or "Best leave old ghosts where they rest." The building rotted in isolation. Vines crept through the shutters. Paint peeled like dried skin. But no one dared tear it down. Then in 1871, the land was inherited by a local judge named Everett Langley. Langley, a man of strict logic and deep skepticism, ordered a survey of the property for development. His goal, convert the old grounds into a boarding school. Work began that spring. Laborers arrived with axes, carts, and lime to sanitize the grounds. On the second morning of demolition, a foreman named Albie Finch broke through a patch of loose stone behind the altar in the chapel. Beneath it they found a crawlspace. Within minutes, Finch vomited in the grass outside. The other workers followed, coughing from the smell. Inside that space, 22 small skulls, arranged in a perfect ring facing inward. The sheriff was called. Langley sealed off the property again. But no investigation followed. The bones were never catalogued. No grave markers added. Finch and 3 others left town that week. Langley moved to Kentucky the following year and never returned. The Wren house was once again abandoned. But rumors returned with renewed force. A girl walking home from school claimed she saw someone standing in the upper window, wearing a child's bonnet. A widower swore he heard singing coming from the well, an old hymn, the same one his sister used to hum when they were children. And a teacher from the neighboring parish, who briefly rented a cabin nearby, found dozens of small handprints on the outside of her windows every morning for a week. When she tried to report it to the county, the clerk looked her in the eye and asked only one question. "Did they speak to you?" She packed her belongings that afternoon and was never seen again in New Elbridge. Then came the final disappearance that sealed the legend. In 1896, a historian from Boston named Jonah Pike arrived in the area, researching abandoned colonial sites. He was drawn to the Wren house by its age and isolation. According to his journal, discovered years later in an antique desk sold at auction, he entered the house on August 12, just after midday. He described dust so thick it hung in the air, stairs that groaned like wounded wood, and a pervasive scent of lavender and rot. His final entry was brief. Basement door ajar. Whispers beneath floor. Children's voices, but they don't know I'm listening. He was never found. Only his journal, coat, and a child's ribbon, knotted into the shape of a cross, remained on the front steps. By the turn of the century, the Wren house had become a myth whispered to children to keep them from wandering. Obey your mother or Miss Wren will take you next. A local hymn was rewritten with a darker second verse that referenced the children in the floor. No one remembered how it started. It just existed, like the fog, like the feeling that something still moved inside those walls. In 1924, as modernity crept through Illinois and land development pushed closer, a new owner named Richard Dalloway attempted once more to reclaim the land. It was during a dig for a septic trench that workers unearthed a sealed hatch buried under a mound of roots and brick. When opened, they found it dry, untouched by water or time. Inside were children's belongings, neatly arranged. A wooden doll with its face scratched off. A hymn book open to a page titled, "Prepare Ye the Way." A list of rules written in faded ink, the last one reading, "When the bell tolls, return to silence." And a bundle of fabric tied with hair. No bones this time. No bodies. Just silence. The hatch was resealed. The workers were paid to remain silent. Dalloway sold the property weeks later, and all records of his ownership vanished. But the children's names, those who lived, those who vanished, and those buried without prayer, still exist, hidden in ledgers, etched into the margins of forgotten Bibles, whispered in sleep by the last of the elders. 45 children. One summer. And a woman behind an iron gate who believed silence was the only path to grace. Chapter 2. The Discipline of Silence. Silence was more than a rule at the Wren house. It was law. From the moment a child arrived, sometimes weeping, sometimes still in shock, they were stripped of their birth name, dressed in gray and given a number. Not one of them spoke aloud again. According to the fragmented journal of Clara Eames, a kitchen maid who worked in the house during the winter of 1811, the children were not taught songs, prayers, or poems. Instead, they memorized movements. Clara describes the daily routine as a theater of shadows. Children rose at dawn, lined up facing east, bowed to the sun without a word, then proceeded to their duties in complete quiet. Speaking, humming, even coughing without permission earned what Miss Wren called refinement time, a punishment Clara never witnessed but often heard through the floorboards of the back hall. She wrote. They returned, changed. Mouths trembling. One boy's tongue bled for 2 days. I never saw him eat again. Miss Wren believed silence brought children closer to God. She claimed the world was too loud, too full of sin, of voices clamoring for attention, of grief shouted instead of buried. In her mind, children were still malleable, still pure enough to be molded into what she called instruments of grace. This belief was not just philosophical. It was ritualistic. Once a month, during the new moon, she led what she termed the stillness. Clara describes it as a ceremony held in the candlelit chapel, where children sat in a perfect circle on the floor, eyes closed, hands on their knees. Miss Wren stood at the center, reciting psalms altered in strange ways. She changed words, inverted passages. One phrase recurred again and again. Empty the vessel, that the Master may dwell. Clara once tried to peer in through a crack in the chapel door. What she saw haunted her for the rest of her life. She wrote. They didn't move. Not one of them. But their mouths, they were open. All of them. As if waiting for something to enter. By spring Clara had run away. She took nothing. Didn't collect wages. Her father found her in a convent 3 towns away, curled in a fetal position, whispering the number 45 over and over. She died 2 months later from complications following a miscarriage. No one had known she was pregnant. Surviving letters from parish officials revealed that Miss Wren corresponded with at least 2 other women who ran similar homes. One in Vermont, the other in Georgia. Their letters, preserved only because they were intercepted during a mail investigation in 1813, hint at shared beliefs. The soul is weightless only when the voice is extinguished, and that the hush of the child is the breath of salvation. One letter, signed only with the initial L, contained a chilling passage. We have made progress. 3 have reached stillness without convulsion. I believe the tongue can be trained not to resist if pressure is applied early enough. No reply from Miss Wren was ever found. But in the Wren house basement, uncovered briefly during the 1924 land dig, investigators found a wooden panel inscribed with childlike carvings. They appeared to be finger-drawn, possibly in soot or dried blood. Among the scrawls were rows of tally marks, and one repeated shape, a pair of lips crossed out with an X. The town of New Elbridge continued to look the other way. In 1812, as children vanished and Miss Wren's sermons grew more esoteric, no investigation was launched. Families who had once trusted her now avoided the house but said nothing aloud. The preacher stopped visiting. The schoolmaster, whose niece had once been accepted into the home, left town without explanation. But not everyone remained silent. A woman named Judith Merriweather, a widow who lived 2 plots down from the Wren property, kept a diary. In it she describes a disturbing sight. July 14th. Moon high. Heard movement from chapel. Thought it was raccoons. Looked out and saw the children standing in the yard. All 45. Perfect rows. Hands at sides. Eyes open. Not blinking. Miss Wren stood in front with a cloth over her face. She whispered, and they all turned toward my window in unison. I closed the curtain and did not sleep. She reported this to no one. 2 weeks later she was found at her dining table, dead from heart failure, her eyes wide open and her mouth stuffed with fabric from a gray uniform sleeve. The coroner called it a suicide. No one attended her funeral. In August of 1812, the tolling bell of the Wren house was heard again, for the first time in nearly a month. It rang 33 times. Then silence. 3 days later, smoke was seen rising from the chimney. A boy named Elias, whose brother had been taken in that spring, rode his father's horse up to the gate. What he found was chilling. The house appeared untouched, no broken glass, no sign of chaos. But there were no children in sight. No movement. No sound. Just the smell of burnt fabric and lavender. He called out. No answer. He walked up to the chapel door. It was ajar. Inside he saw the pews pushed to the walls, the floor scrubbed clean, and a gray bonnet hanging from the bell rope. Beneath it written in chalk. The silence is complete. Elias ran home. His father returned with him the next morning. But the chapel was empty. The chalk had been erased. The bonnet was gone. And Miss Wren? Vanished. No one ever found her body. No grave, no sightings. Just a list in the priest's drawer, tucked beneath a hymnal. Marcus. Josephine. Abel. Lydia. Ruth. 45 names. 45 voices. Gone. The townsfolk sealed the chapel door with nails and scriptures. They called in a local mason to seal the basement entrance. Then they closed the gate, hung a cross from its iron bars and agreed, without ever speaking the words, to let the house rot. But rot does not mean forget. Because to this day, on certain nights, travelers swear they hear children's voices carried by the wind along Alder Lane. Not crying. Not laughing. Just humming. Oh, hollow. Unbroken. The humming grew louder after the rain. That's what James Weller, a Civil War veteran who settled near the old Wren property in 1867, wrote in a torn journal entry found in the lining of his military trunk. He described nights when the soil seemed to vibrate. Not thunder. Not footsteps. A pulsing rhythm as if the earth were breathing beneath the chapel. He boarded up his windows and stopped using the well on the east edge of his land, said the water tasted of copper and left his grandchildren sleepwalking. In 1873, a traveling photographer named Silas Mercer passed through New Elbridge and set up a makeshift studio near the general store. He offered portraits in exchange for dry goods. One day, intrigued by the ghost stories, he walked the old road to Alder Lane and snapped 3 photos of the Wren house. Only one developed. The image shows the structure in its decaying state, porch collapsed, shutters half-hinged. But in the attic window, faint and indistinct, there appears the outline of several small figures, shoulder to shoulder, heads tilted slightly to the side. Mercer left town that same night. He tore the negative and never spoke of it again. His wife later told a neighbor that he'd started muttering in his sleep. They never blink. They never breathe. Back in 1812, as the disappearances continued, a boy named Ezra, barely 10, was the last to be seen entering the Wren house. His mother had died during childbirth. His father, a bricklayer, was losing his sight and feared he couldn't care for the child much longer. Miss Wren accepted Ezra without hesitation. He arrived with a red scarf and a handmade wooden horse carved by his father. Neither item was ever seen again. But Ezra left something behind, a letter. Discovered in the hollow of a tree near the chapel wall, the letter was addressed to his father. It had never been delivered. The ink was faded, the spelling crude, but the message was unmistakable. Dear Pa, we mustn't speak. She says the words steal the soul. I miss the sky. I miss you. I don't like the room below. It smells like salt and crying. They made Ruth go in and she didn't come back. Sometimes I pretend I'm a bird and fly away. Tell Ma I still remember her songs, even if I can't sing them. The note was signed simply, Ezra number 46. But there were only 45 children listed in the parish ledger. To this day no one knows who number 46 was. Some believe Ezra wrote the number wrong. Others claim Miss Wren kept one child in secret, perhaps a biological child, or a replacement for someone already lost. A few believe number 46 was never a child at all, but something else, something the children were being prepared for, or fed to. One final letter, written by a circuit preacher named Harlan Brigg in 1822, 10 years after the Wren house closed, offers the most chilling clue. He had heard the stories and made a pilgrimage to the ruins in what he called a holy act of cleansing. What he found drove him nearly mad. In his account he wrote, "The walls whisper, not metaphor, truth. I placed my ear against the brick and heard them, the voices of babes, repeating scripture backwards, and something deeper, a voice not made by breath. It asked me to kneel. I ran. I have never prayed harder." Brigg was later committed to a sanitarium in Indiana, where he died reciting Psalm 39. I was mute and silent, I held my peace to no avail, and my distress grew worse. His Bible, found beside his bed, had one verse underlined in blood. Even the stones will cry out. The discipline of silence was not just a doctrine. It was a wound, a generational scar that infected the land, the town, and all who tried to understand what happened during that summer in 1812. Silence became its own kind of predator. It erased records. It swallowed testimonies. It ensured that the victims had no names beyond numbers, no graves beyond dirt, no voices beyond the hum that still echoes along the trees of Alder Lane. The Wren house still stands. No one dares touch it. The last recorded attempt to demolish it, in 1987, ended when 2 men were crushed by falling timber. A third vanished. The machinery failed. The permits were revoked. The company dissolved within the year. And on the foundation stone, beneath the peeling gray wood, a single carving remains, worn, almost unreadable, but there. Be still. He is listening. Chapter 3, The Children That Never Grew Old. When anthropologist Helen Trask arrived in New Elbridge in 1972, she wasn't looking for ghosts. She was cataloging migration patterns of early German settlers for a university thesis. But in an old county storage room, beneath piles of rusted census records and land deeds, she found a sealed box marked only with a red waxed W. Inside were 46 photographs, sepia-toned, all taken in the same small room. Each showed a child dressed in gray, all barefoot, all expressionless. Some sat on wooden stools. Others stood with their hands clasped. But in every photograph their mouths were closed and their eyes wide open, unblinking, unnatural. Some of the children appeared to be repeated across photos, but slightly altered. A girl with braids in one image now wore her hair shorn in another. A boy missing an ear in one photo seemed to have it restored in a later one, though crooked and off-color. Most disturbing, the backdrop in every photo was the same, a wooden wall with deep scratch marks. Helen brought the box to the county historian. He told her to leave town. 2 nights later her motel room was ransacked. Not robbed, just disrupted. Her belongings were untouched, but the box of photos was gone. In its place, a torn hymnal page and a child's sock, folded and placed carefully on the pillow. Helen returned to Chicago and abandoned her thesis. She never published again. But before she died in 1998, she gave an interview to an independent journalist, now archived in the National Folklore Institute. In that recording she says only one clear sentence before breaking down in tears. They weren't photos of the living. They were portraits of what remained. The Wren house became an unspeakable relic. Not haunted in the usual sense. No slamming doors, no flying chairs. Just a presence. A stillness so thick that even birds would not nest near its eaves. In 2003, a team of amateur ghost hunters spent a single night there. Their footage, found later, corrupted and glitching, captured only 1 hour before the camera died. But in that hour something inexplicable occurs. At minute 42, one of the investigators walks past a long hallway mirror. In the reflection he is not alone. Lined up behind him, just barely visible, are rows of children in gray. So, unmoving, silent. He never returned to the site. He moved to Arizona under a new name. His sister, interviewed by local news in 2011, said, "He stopped sleeping. Said they were always watching. Said they were waiting for someone to say the wrong word." But long before cameras and ghost shows, there were signs that something had gone terribly wrong. Signs buried in language, in the ritualistic echoes of a community that never healed. In the early 1900s, children in New Elbridge played a game called Quiet Circle. The rules were never written but passed down from sibling to sibling. It involved standing in a ring, eyes shut, not speaking no matter what was whispered in your ear. The one who lasted longest won. No one remembers where the game came from. But in a 1931 school yearbook, a photo shows the children in a playground, standing in that same configuration described in Clara Eames's journal from 1812. 45 children. Circle. Eyes closed. Mouths sealed. That year, a girl named Maisie went missing. She was last seen in the school basement, where the children had recreated the chapel from the old stories. A room supervisor reported seeing small footprints in the dust, leading to the corner of the room and stopping at the wall. No prints returned. Maisie's body was never found. Only her shoes, neatly placed side by side in front of the janitor's closet. In 1956, a private investigator named Leonard Hill visited the area after reading a rumor in a now-defunct occultist magazine. His notes, found after his death and unpublished, describe a peculiar theory. He believed the Wren house wasn't simply a place of abuse or murder. He argued it was a sound trap, a structure designed not just to suppress speech but to harvest silence. He connected the timing of the children's disappearances to lunar cycles and noted that the volume of birdsong in surrounding areas dipped significantly during those periods, even a century later. His hypothesis, that something old, something ancient and not entirely human, was being fed by the stillness of children. Not their lives. Their absence of sound. Hill claimed Miss Wren wasn't mad. She was a facilitator. A believer. Perhaps even the final child herself, grown, reformed, reborn. His final journal entry before he too vanished. There is a sound that exists only in the absence of all others. A hum beneath the silence. I heard it today. It knows my name. From time to time, the story resurfaces in subtle ways. A hymn altered to match Miss Wren's mantras found in an Alabama church. A gray uniform discovered in a Louisiana attic, labeled Child of Grace number 29. An orphanage fire in upstate New York in 1979 where none of the children tried to escape. The pattern repeats. The silence grows. There are even whispers that a university in Ohio found references to the discipline of silence in an unpublished theological manuscript, written not in English, but in a strange, phonetic Latin with repetitive invocations resembling those recorded by Clara Eames. That document too is now missing. But fragments survive. Enough to form a litany. Enough to recognize a code woven through history. He who dwells in quiet shall never hunger. The vessel must not speak. 45 is the gate. The 46th walks within. Back in New Elbridge, the Wren house remains untouched. Locals still refuse to speak of it. Tourists are directed away. GPS glitches near Alder Lane. Mail is not delivered there. And children born in the area have been recorded humming in their sleep, songs no one taught them. In 2018, an anonymous box was sent to the State Archive. Inside, a single VHS tape. No return address. The tape, when played, shows grainy footage of the Wren house interior. No timestamp. No commentary. Just a static shot of the hallway. At minute 12, a door opens slowly. A figure emerges. Not Miss Wren. Not a child. Something in between. Its mouth is sewn shut. And yet, from the speakers comes a sound that has been described by archivists as a lullaby sung in reverse, layered with static and faint sobbing. The video ends with one phrase superimposed in white serif font. Do not teach them to speak, or they will remember who they are. The phrase haunted the state archivist who reviewed the tape. She tried to dismiss it as a hoax, an elaborate student prank or a case of misfiled folklore material. But days later she began reporting auditory hallucinations, the sound of pages turning in empty rooms, of children giggling faintly under her desk, of hymns sung through a wall that didn't exist. Her final report before resigning read, "It's not a story. It's a system. A cycle. And it's not over." The Wren house is not the only place where silence holds weight. Throughout American history, similar patterns emerge. Places where groups of children vanished, where official records were sealed, where survivors refused to speak. A boarding school in Wyoming. A chapel in rural Maine. An asylum in Missouri. In each case, elements match. Gray uniforms, hymnals with missing verses, reports of the humming. But it all circles back to 1812, to the summer when 45 children were silenced and the world simply let it happen. And it isn't just echoes that remain. In 2021, a forestry crew clearing invasive species near the New Elbridge outskirts unearthed a buried iron box. Inside were several items wrapped in wax cloth, a cracked mirror, a rosary made of bone, and a hand-drawn diagram labeled in near-perfect penmanship, the spiral of listening. The diagram showed a chapel floor precisely measured. At its center, a sigil of intersecting circles with 45 dots arranged like teeth around a hollow middle. In the center, instead of a 46th dot, the word return. One crew member took a photo before the state confiscated the box. That photo circulated on obscure internet forums and occultist threads. Some called it a hoax. Others recognized the sigil. A symbol found etched into children's desks in a now-demolished Kansas orphanage. A matching shape spotted in chalk outside a shuttered daycare in Oregon. None of the children from those institutions were ever located. Still, there are those who dig. In 2022, a podcaster named Craig Halvorson devoted an entire season of his horror true crime show to the Wren house. He interviewed historians, priests, even one woman who claimed to be a descendant of Miss Wren herself. The season finale ended with him broadcasting live from the perimeter of Alder Lane. He stepped past the rusted gate. He read names from the original ledger aloud, one by one. And as he reached the final entry, the audio feed distorted violently. Listeners reported hearing screaming, not from Halvorson but from children. A choir of voices, layered atop each other, chanting a single phrase. He is not the 46th. The podcast was removed from all platforms within 48 hours. Halvorson's body was never recovered. Only his shoes, wet, laced, facing the gate. What happened in 1812 was not just a crime. It was not simply a tragedy. It was a breach. Something was invited into that house. And 45 children were not taken, they were given. Given by a woman who believed silence was sacred. By a town too afraid to question. By a country that never looked back. And now, more than 2 centuries later, that silence continues to spread, like a low humming thread stitched through the seams of forgotten buildings, through lullabies sung to children in their cribs, through the gaps in memory we explain away as just a dream. But not all dreams end when we wake up. Some stay, some wait, and some, like the children of the Wren house, never grow old. Because silence has a perfect memory. Chapter 4, Number 46. There was no number 46. That's what the officials claimed in the 1924 land dispute case. That's what the church ledger insisted. That's what the priest's annotations, faded by humidity and time, confirmed. 45 names, no more. And yet, in every corner of the Wren house mythos, in every artifact, every hushed testimony and forgotten page, the number appears, etched into wood, scribbled onto hymnals, scratched behind mirrors. 46. Who, or what, was number 46? In 1983, a theology student at St. Anselm's College submitted a thesis titled, The 46th Vessel, Sound, Absence and the False Grace. Her name was Audrea Sims. Her work was immediately rejected by the review board for what they called aberrant content and psychological instability. The thesis was never published. Sims was expelled and admitted to a private facility within the year. But the manuscript survives, circulating online in fragmented PDFs, handwritten transcriptions and photos of carbon copies. In it, Sims outlines a disturbing theory, that the Wren house was not simply a place of ritual silence but a womb. That the 45 children were not sacrificed, but absorbed, distilled into a singular entity birthed through their voiceless devotion. That number 46 is not a child. It is the result. Sims writes, when all voices are silenced, one voice remains. The voice beneath the floor. The voice that speaks only when others do not. It is not of God. It is not of man. It is of hush. She refers to it throughout the thesis as the listener. According to her hypothesis, Miss Wren was merely a vessel, a guide for this presence that feeds not on flesh or blood but on quiet. On the space where prayers used to be. On the echo left behind when a name is forgotten. Sims's most shocking claim? That the listener still exists, and that it lives in those who practice the discipline, who repeat the rituals even unknowingly. A child told not to cry. A woman silenced at the dinner table. A family that avoids naming their grief. She writes, the listener thrives not in haunted houses, but in households of shame. In bedrooms where apologies are swallowed. In churches where the hymns stop and no one asks why. The Wren house was simply the most concentrated form of its cultivation. More recently, in 2015, a team of restoration architects was hired to map historical structures across Jefferson County for a federal grant. One of them, a woman named Lee Morano, was assigned the ruins of the Wren house. What she found was not a crumbling colonial building, but a geometric anomaly. The structure had no consistent measurements. No wall was exactly parallel. The staircase rotated 5 degrees off true north. The floorboards varied in length by fractions of inches in a repeating pattern, 4, 5, 4, 6. And behind one of the chapel's false walls she discovered a hidden alcove filled with discarded toys, whittled animals, cloth dolls, and small glass jars containing what appeared to be fingernail clippings. In the center, carved into the stone. They gave us numbers, but he gave us purpose. Morano quit the project. She later told her partner she kept hearing her own voice whispered back to her at night, mimicking her tone but always a few syllables behind. The 46th was not meant to be remembered. That's the point. It only exists if we don't name it. That's the paradox of the listener. Miss Wren understood this. Her doctrine of silence wasn't only about obedience, it was about birthing something outside the rules of theology, outside chronology. 45 was the cage. 46 was what emerged when the latch broke. And still it waits. In 2023, a research assistant at the Folklore Archives in Evanston came across a children's book in a donation box. No publisher. No author. Just a gray cover with no title and a hand-drawn illustration of a house with no windows. Inside, 45 pages. Each with a different child. Each one smiling with mouths closed, eyes wide. Names like Ruth, Abel, Marcus, Lydia. The final page was blank, except for a fingerprint. Pressed in charcoal. No face. No name. No number. Just one line beneath it. This one listens best. The assistant resigned that week. She now lives in rural Idaho off-grid. Her voicemail ends with the words, "Sh." He's still learning. There are moments, fleeting, disorienting, when you might feel it too. Not a ghost. Not a possession. But the pressure behind your ears when a room goes too quiet. The chill when a child suddenly stops speaking mid-sentence. The voice in a dream that asks you not to scream. The instinct to hush someone before they name what hurts. That is where the 46th lives now. Not in New Elbridge. Not in the attic of the Wren house. But in all the places we've let silence take root and called it peace. In 1812, Miss Wren didn't bury children. She didn't murder them, not in the way history defines it. She erased them. She offered their stillness to something vast, something formless. And when the last breath fell quiet, the listener opened its eyes. And number 46 took its first silent step. Now it waits. For a voice to stop. For a question not asked. For the hum beneath the silence to be heard again. And once it is, it will not be a whisper. It will be our voice. Because when the last name is forgotten, the listener won't come for the children. It will come for us. In 2024, a document surfaced on an encrypted message board frequented by archivists and paranormal researchers. It appeared to be a transcription of a sermon delivered in secret in the 1800s, labeled only as the 46th Psalm rewritten. The language was archaic, biblical in tone, but the content deviated sharply from Scripture. Be still and know that you are hollow. I will be the silence between your bones. I will be the still water where no reflection remains. I will be the name that cannot be spoken, for the breath will not come. I am the 46th. What was most disturbing, however, was not the content of the sermon, but the metadata embedded in the file. According to the server logs, the document had been uploaded from a location marked within the coordinates of New Elbridge. But New Elbridge no longer exists. The town was officially dissolved in 1964 due to economic collapse and rural abandonment. Its location, if mapped today, is nothing but overgrown forest and sinkholes. And yet, people who've attempted to visit the site report something strange. No cell service, GPS loops, audio corruption in recordings. A man from Cincinnati attempted to film a vlog there in October 2023. His footage ends abruptly at 3 minutes and 14 seconds, the final frame showing the old chapel through the trees, intact, not in ruins. As if it had never decayed. As if someone had been preserving it. When questioned by authorities, the man had no memory of the trip. His final YouTube upload is titled, 45 Steps to Silence, Do Not Take the Last One. And still the stories persist. A child in Utah refuses to speak, despite no known disability. Instead, he hums a song in his sleep, always the same 5 notes. His parents record it and submit it to an online forum. A folklorist recognizes the melody. It matches a hymn from 1811 titled, Still the Lamb, Still the Grave. A hymn once performed at the Wren house. A woman in Berlin finds a letter hidden in the lining of an antique cradle bought at auction. It reads, The silence travels. It does not age. Do not let them number your child. In Detroit, a boy disappears after attending a school field trip to a defunct chapel. His shoes are found days later, placed neatly at the foot of the altar. The church claims it has been sealed for 12 years. But the police report confirms the lock had been opened from the inside. They said the Wren house was a tragedy. A relic. A wound. But they were wrong. It was never a wound. It was a seed. And now the 46th walks in places we don't expect. Suburbs, schools, churches, institutions. Not with blood. Not with fury. But with the patience of something that does not age. Does not speak. Does not blink. And it waits for the moment we stop listening to one another. The moment silence feels easier than truth. The moment we choose quiet over connection. When we swallow pain instead of naming it. When we shush a child who's trying to warn us. That's when it grows stronger. That's when it opens its eyes. That's when number 46 steps into the room, and you never even hear it come. Chapter 5, The Echo Children. Almost equals 9,000 characters. They don't call themselves descendants. They don't wear robes or chant. They don't gather in churches or publish manifestos. But they exist. Quietly. Deliberately. They call themselves the Echo Children, a name whispered on obscure forums, embedded in footnotes of banned publications and spoken once, only once, on a dead radio frequency picked up by a weather balloon over Indiana. The message lasted 5 seconds. 45 became 1. The rest are echoes. The first confirmed mention of the group dates to 1999, buried in a handwritten note recovered from a psychiatric hospital in Oregon slated for demolition. The author was a former child psychologist who had spent 17 years working with mute children across 4 states. In her note, addressed to whomever is left, she writes of children who did not just refuse to speak but absorbed silence, who anticipated questions, who hummed in unison without instruction, who, when placed in separate rooms, drew the same symbol, a ring of 45 circles around a single dot. She writes, "I do not believe they were born this way. I believe they were chosen, or called, or copied." The term echo began appearing more frequently after a series of disappearances between 2004 and 2012, each involving children from group homes or foster systems. In each case, investigators noted similarities. No signs of forced entry, no screams heard, and in 3 instances identical drawings left behind, rows of silent children with blacked-out mouths. In Wisconsin, a nun reported that 3 children in her care had stopped speaking on the same day, January 8, 2010. When asked why, one child handed her a folded paper with the words, "He listens better when we don't interrupt." The nun was later found in the chapel, her hands folded neatly, her tongue removed and placed in the collection plate. No one saw anyone enter. The children were gone. In 2016, a linguist named Miles Alcott published a paper on phonetic trauma in post-orphanage populations. What began as academic analysis turned into obsession. He noticed a pattern across institutions with histories of abuse. Whenever children were silenced by violence or fear, they developed what he termed resonant conditioning. A sensitivity not to sound, but to absence. Some children claimed to hear things only when everyone else had left the room. One girl described it as the voice under the floor that finishes your thoughts. Another boy, blind from birth, insisted he could see the silence, described as a black thread coiled inside his head. Alcott was later fired from his university position after proposing an echo response test, in which recorded silence from the Wren House Chapel, captured during a 1957 acoustic survey, was played to children under observation. Within 40 seconds, all 5 children in the pilot test began humming in harmony. They had never met. They had never heard the melody before. And when asked afterward, none remembered doing it. The test was buried. The university denied it happened. But Alcott's personal notes tell another story. In them he writes, "They hum the same pitch. They stop at 45 seconds. And then they wait. I think it's not music. It's a doorbell." There are now stories, fringe, unverified but consistent, of children who disappear for weeks and return altered. Not broken. Not traumatized. Just wrong. They stare too long. They don't blink. They repeat questions before answering them. One foster mother reported her daughter staring at a blank wall for an hour, then turning and asking, "Do you know where they put the others?" She was 6 years old. Another family discovered their adopted son digging in the garden late at night. When asked what he was doing, he replied, "Looking for the silence." The echo children don't organize in the traditional sense. They aren't a cult exactly. They're more like transmitters. Relays of whatever was awakened in the Wren house. Some believe they are reincarnations of the original 45. Others believe they are spontaneous vessels, drawn to silence the way iron is drawn to magnets. And some think they are simply what happens when you try to erase something that refuses to die. A researcher in Montana, name redacted, claims to have identified clusters of echo activity around the ruins of former orphanages and quiet towns with high ratios of child disappearances to population. Each cluster corresponds to what she calls a sound gap, areas where ambient noise dips far below normal levels for no identifiable reason. In those areas, patterns reappear. 45 chairs in a circle. 45 footsteps leading to a sealed room. 45 chalk handprints on a basement wall. And in the center of each, nothing. Not silence. Absence. The Wren house was the first gate, but not the last. The Echo children are not seeking revenge. They are not angry. They do not wail or knock or scream. They do something much more terrifying. They wait. They wait for the world to grow quiet enough. For our voices to fade. For our stories to be forgotten. For parents to stop singing lullabies. For teachers to stop asking questions. For all 45 voices to fall silent again, so the listener can speak through the 46th. So that what was born in 1812, in a quiet room lined with children too scared to cry, can finally be heard. And when it is, it will not sound like a scream. It will sound like us, like all of us, saying nothing at all. Some say the Echo children are born. Others say they're made. But there's a third theory, one that began circulating in private circles after a 2019 conference at a university in Belgium. A discredited anthropologist presented a theory based not on sound or silence but on erasure. Not just the loss of voice, but the systemic loss of memory. Collective forgetting. She posited that the 46th isn't a child. It's not even a being. It's an infection. A pattern that spreads wherever memory is scrubbed, wherever grief is silenced, wherever stories are interrupted and left unfinished. She compared it to a virus but linguistic, emotional, a self-replicating vacuum that devours narrative. And she believed the Echo children weren't vessels, they were symptoms, walking gaps, living reminders of what was lost. To prove it, she brought forward evidence. In one rural American town, she found a school where the yearbooks for 1973, 1981, 1990, and 2012 were completely blank for the third grade classes. Pages there, photos missing. Teachers didn't remember those years. Parents refused to discuss them. She found a child, now an adult, who should have been in one of those missing classes. He had no photos of himself before age 9. No drawings, no report cards, no birthday parties. And yet he remembered everything. He told her. We were 45. But someone else always sat in the circle. The teachers didn't see her. But she hummed louder than all of us. He then asked the anthropologist a strange question. Do you remember the first time you were told to be quiet? She didn't. And she never published again. What makes the Echo children so disturbing isn't their silence. It's their coherence. They find each other. They move in patterns. They communicate without sound. They smile in perfect synchronization. And in one documented case from 2020, they stopped breathing for exactly 46 seconds, together, before exhaling at once. No one taught them this. No one knows how far the phenomenon has spread. Some believe the Echo children are drawn to places where the Wren house has been replicated, not physically but emotionally, foster systems that suppress individuality, religious orders that replace names with numbers, households where silence is enforced, not chosen. Everywhere silence is imposed with authority, the listener listens. Everywhere silence becomes habitual, not sacred, the 46th watches. And sometimes, very rarely, something happens that suggests the infection has already grown beyond children. A surgeon in Ohio hums during operations. Always the same 5 notes. A senator references the discipline of silence during an unrelated policy speech and then corrects herself, visibly disturbed, claiming she'd never seen that phrase before. A child is born deaf and mute, but begins responding to voices before anyone speaks. A teacher draws a spiral on the chalkboard without knowing why. In each case, no one remembers doing it. And in each case, someone, usually an outsider, goes missing within 72 hours. Only their shoes remain, always facing the same direction, toward the nearest quiet place. The circle is closing. The hum is returning. And the Echo children are no longer content to remain in the background. They are walking toward the 46th. They are waiting for the final silence. Chapter 6, The Last Door. There is no marked path to the Wren house. No official records of its location, no signs, no satellite image that stays uncorrupted long enough to confirm its presence. And yet people keep finding it. Or maybe, more precisely, it finds them. In March of 2024, a man named Julian Parks went missing near the old forest boundary in what was once Jefferson County, Illinois. His wife said he'd become obsessed with echoes, drawing circles and muttering about a hum only he could hear. 2 days before his disappearance, he mailed her a package. Inside were 45 small stones, each etched with a child's name. And a final stone with no inscription, just a deep groove carved into its center. On the back of the envelope, written in a trembling hand, "The last door isn't locked. It's quiet. Authorities never found him. But the search team did find something else. A path. Overgrown, half swallowed by the woods, but undeniably there. The trail led to a clearing where the air felt unnaturally still. Not silent. So. No birds. No insects. No wind. At the center of the clearing, the Wren house. Not a ruin. Intact. As though preserved in amber, untouched by time. The windows sealed, the porch sturdy, the wood clean and gray. On the door a small brass plaque. They are ready now. The team left. No report was filed. They were told not to return. A month later, a graduate student from the University of Chicago, Nia Velasquez, took it upon herself to investigate the legend for her thesis on American folklore. She traced census records, interviewed surviving descendants of the New Elbridge settlers, and eventually located the same clearing. Her journal, recovered from her abandoned car, chronicles everything. The sudden absence of sound upon arrival. The feeling of being underwater without being wet. The appearance of the house at twilight, when the woods stopped breathing. The overwhelming sense that she was being expected. Inside she found no furniture. No dust. No light fixtures. Just 45 child-sized chairs, perfectly spaced in a circle on the chapel floor. And in the center, a mirror. The mirror did not reflect her. It reflected a little girl in a gray uniform humming. Nia's final journal entry reads, "I thought I came here to record the past, but I think I'm part of the future. The 46th isn't coming. She's already here. She's always been here. She just needed us to be quiet long enough to open the last door. Nia never came out." There are now rumors of a new phenomenon in southern Illinois, people going mute overnight. Not by illness. By choice. They wake up and simply never speak again. They aren't distressed. They're calm. Focused. Some hum. Some draw spirals in the dirt. Some stare at corners of their homes as if waiting for a door to open where no door exists. They do not respond to questions. But when alone, some of them whisper. Only one recording has ever captured what they say. It was found on a broken audio recorder left near a hiking trail close to New Elbridge. The speaker is male, mid-40s. His voice is low, rhythmic, entranced. He says, "They walked into the quiet. They left their names behind. And now she knows how to build again." Then static. Then humming. 45 overlapping tones. And finally a child's voice, not recorded, not whispered, but present. Who will be the next to forget themselves? The Wren house is not a location anymore. It's a condition. A viral stillness that spreads through stories, through trauma, through the spaces we refuse to name. And the last door? It's not in Illinois anymore. It's in you. It's in the moment you choose not to ask where the missing child went. The moment you turn off the radio because the static gets too loud. The moment you stop reading aloud because someone, or something, is listening. They say evil shouts. That darkness screams. But that's not true. The oldest things, the ones that linger, that wait, that remake the world from underneath, they don't need to shout. They just need us to stop. To stop remembering. To stop grieving. To stop questioning. To stop speaking. To stop telling the story before the final chapter is finished. Because the 46th was never a child. It was a silence so complete, it became a shape. A name so forgotten, it became a presence. A door left open so long it no longer needed hinges. And now, it walks. It listens. It waits. And when enough of us forget how to tell the story, when all 45 names are spoken one last time and the room stays quiet, the listener will answer. Not with words, but with us. Epilogue, what was left behind? There is a house in southern Illinois that no longer appears on maps. The trees around it have grown taller than they should. The air above it warps light just enough to disorient your eyes. The road leading to it changes direction if you're watching too closely. And yet, some still find it. Not the ones searching for thrill or spectacle. Not the YouTubers. Not the skeptics. The house finds those who carry a silence in them too heavy to name. The ones who've swallowed grief instead of speaking it. The ones who were told as children to be quiet, and obeyed so deeply they never unlearned it. Those are the ones the listener calls to. Those are the ones who vanish. For over 2 centuries, 45 children have been buried in silence. Not beneath the earth. Beneath forgetting. Beneath denial. Beneath the polite phrases we use to cover horror. Tragedy, misfortune, accident. There was no accident. What happened in 1812 was deliberate. Constructed. Devout. Miss Wren believed that God lived in the absence of noise. That to bring children closer to heaven, they had to be emptied of voice, of resistance, of self. She didn't kill them. She offered them. And something, whether ancient or born in that house, answered her. 45 children went quiet. And one new voice emerged. They called it the 46. It was never just one girl. Never just one echo. It was a new shape for silence. A new appetite. A silence so absolute that it began to replicate. The documents are scattered now, erased, redacted, burned. But the pieces remain. The photographs. The hymns. The circles. The numbers. You've seen them without knowing. In the child sitting alone at recess, humming a song no one taught them. In the adult who stares too long at the dark before going to sleep. In the nightmares where your mouth won't open, and your name is a sound you can't recall. The 46th is not waiting in the woods anymore. It has entered the world. Through every parent who punishes a child for asking too many questions. Through every institution that replaces a name with a number. Through every system that mistakes obedience for virtue. Through every moment a voice is silenced and no one listens. The Wren house was never just a building. It was the prototype. The cathedral of quiet. Now the cathedral has no walls. Now the ritual has no schedule. Now the doorway is anywhere the story goes unfinished. You finished the story. You read the names. You stepped into the circle. You opened the last page. And that makes you part of it now. But there is still one choice left. You can forget what you've read. Turn the screen off. Let it fade like a nightmare does by morning. You can tell yourself it's fiction. A story. Just another creepy tale. Or you can speak. You can say their names. You can remember the children. You can break the spiral by refusing to be silent. You can choose noise, the raw human kind. Crying. Screaming. Singing. Telling the story again and again, no matter how many times the world tries to hush it. Because the 46th doesn't fear exorcisms or prayers. It fears being remembered. It fears stories that don't end in silence. It fears people who speak even when it hurts. It fears survivors who refuse to look away. It fears you if you speak now. So do it. Break the ritual. Shatter the stillness. Let the walls hear your voice. Because the only thing keeping the door closed now is the sound of us speaking together. The end.